Part 10. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 93. Resonating with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the sealing force field formed is much tighter than the seal set by everyone in the Supernatural Bureau. After all, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has been filled, and every corner of this small world has no omissions. And the force field formed by it naturally covers every corner of this small world, leaving absolutely nothing behind. After sealing the red-clothed fierce ghost of Xiao Shandi's pseudo-world consciousness from the real world, Yuan Meng's eyes instantly turned to the prehistoric world, the underworld of the underworld. At this time, the underworld has become more solid and magnificent, with a solemn atmosphere filling the air, and traces of pure yin energy are filling the entire underworld. Moreover, not only that, the underworld at this time has expanded several times. After the ghosts came to that small world, one can imagine the shock in Yu Zhichen and others' hearts. They were already convinced about the ghosts and the underworld. Under this situation, the fragments of thoughts emitted by it were like a vast ocean, flowing crazily into the underworld, causing it to rapidly expand while it continued to solidify. Up to now, although it is still far smaller than the actual area of Blue Star China, it is still 1/10 of the area of China. At this moment, on the Xuanhuan road behind the Gate of Hell, a group of people were walking slowly forward. These were naturally the ghosts and the souls of Zhang Wuxiao and others they had captured. Yuan Meng could only say sorry for the accidental death of Zhang Wuxiao and that supernatural member. If Yuan Meng's attention had been focused on that small world, he could naturally use the spiritual energy of the world to secretly influence the actions of the red-clothed ghosts and save their lives. It is a pity that at that time, because of the fragments of people's thoughts and consciousness, the nether underworld began to evolve in the ancient world, which caused Yuan Meng's attention to shift to the evolution of the nether underworld. Who knew that in this short period of time, so many things had already happened in that small world? By the time the ghost came and Yuan Meng's attention was diverted, everything had already happened. But, to put it another way, well, it's actually not too late. After all, that small world is filled with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Doesn't this form a soul body? From now on, they can also find another way to survive for a long time in the netherworld. They may even live longer than their colleagues and classmates. As long as the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has not evolved enough to spread to Blue Star. Their colleagues and classmates, after the death of Blue Star, they really died, and it was over, but they had no chance to form souls and enter the netherworld. And among the souls who were pressed by ghosts and kept walking along the Xuanhuan road, the red-clothed fierce ghost stood out. The red-clothed ghost can be reborn indefinitely in the small world, because one of its core roots is integrated into the superficial rules of the small world. As long as no one can break the shallow rules of the small world and destroy its core origin, it can be reborn without limit. However, when it dies, the dissipated spiritual will not completely return. It will only derive the outer spiritual consciousness from its original core, reabsorb the energy of the small world, and evolve the body again. For example, now, this part of his spiritual will that is trapped in his aura body was brought back to the Gate of Hell by the ghost messenger, and when he left the real world and returned to the primitive world, he was also brought back with him. Well, this is not the power of Gui Cha, but the result of Yuan Meng's personal action. And the reason why? But it's because the ghosts so-called traveling through the endless dimensions of time and space and coming to reality from the prehistoric world is simply an illusion. It is indeed possible to open a space portal to the real world in the prehistoric world. However, the space portal it can open, even in the small world under its control, can only open about 1 meter at most, and this is the result of Yuan Meng's personal action. This is because the rules of heaven and earth in the real world are far stronger than those in the prehistoric world. Even in those small worlds with relatively loose rules, there is still strong oppression on the prehistoric world. If you want to freely open space gates, the strength of the rules of the prehistoric world must not be too different from that of the small world. Yuan Mengde can only open a space portal of about 1 meter, let alone others. Even the ancestral dragon, the first creature born in the prehistoric world, cannot travel through multiple dimensions of time and space, and descends from the illusory prehistoric world to these small worlds in the real world. If it truly comes to the real world, it will only completely dissipate between heaven and earth. For the real world, illusion is illusion. It has no basis for existence and can only return to illusion and dissipate. If it were in the small world controlled by Yuan Meng, the ancestral dragon could still exist, but its power would definitely be suppressed to the limit, not to mention that it could traverse endless time and space and the infinite universe with thoughts. Even compared to Yujukan and others, he is not much stronger. At most, he can control the spiritual energy of heaven and earth more easily by relying on his personal advantage and his affinity for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. As for Gui Cha, although he has been endowed by heaven and earth and recognized by Yuan Meng and Emperor Ming, he can instantly appear anywhere in the prehistoric world to capture souls. However, it is also impossible for it to cross the endless dimension of time and space and open the space channel from the prehistoric world to the reality. The reason why it can descend to the reality so easily is actually just the transfer of its consciousness. Nowadays, everything in the prehistoric world is composed of pure spiritual particles, and the ghost messenger is no exception. Its descent into the real world is actually exactly the same as the way Yuan Meng descended to the small world with consciousness, not the descent of its real body. This is related to the formation of the prehistoric world and the characteristics of spiritual particles. It is the embodiment of spiritual power, and naturally it can achieve to a certain extent what the heart wants and what the mind wants. After the ghost messenger obtained the divine post given by heaven and earth, he naturally obtains similar abilities. Of course, this power of the ghost messenger is also limited, that is, it can only be used at the gate of hell. In other words, his power can only be exerted by the identity of the ghost messenger, or the priest of the underworld, in conjunction with the gate of hell. This is actually similar to the Yellow Spring Road, and more of it is the gate of hell, the buildings of the netherworld, and even the power of the underworld itself. Of course, the identity of the underworld priest is also indispensable. If it were someone else, it would be impossible to pass the gate of hell and achieve this effect. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 94. After Ghost's consciousness arrives in the small world of reality, the aura of heaven and earth in the small world will be naturally drawn by his consciousness, forming an identical body of Ghost within a very short period of time. This is also his body, which will gradually solidify when he comes, and gradually become illusory when he leaves. It's not that he is coming or leaving the real dimension, but that his body is solidifying or dissipating. Of course, although for the time being, it cannot yet open the space portal to the real world. However, if the ghost's body is completely unable to come to the small world of the real world, that is not necessarily the case. After all, spiritual energy particles can also directly descend into the real world through the connection between the real world and the prehistoric world. For example, when Yujujhen and others are practicing, they can also directly absorb part of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the prehistoric world. Then, Gazan's body is also completely composed of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, so he can naturally bring his own body to the real world directly. The reason why it didn't come in this way was because of the speed of the spiritual energy from heaven and earth. It takes a certain amount of time for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to come to the real world, and it cannot happen overnight. If the ghosts are allowed to bring their own bodies, how long will it take for the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to condense enough for them to form a physical body? Therefore, the best choice is to directly let the ghost transfer his consciousness and gather the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to form a body. The souls of Zhang Wuxiao and others are no exception, and they also undergo the same transfer of consciousness. However, Goicha's consciousness was transferred independently, while the soul consciousness of Zhang Wuxiao and others were bound and carried by the soul-seducing rope. Of course, although the soul-hooking rope is a kind of binding for the souls of Zhang Wuxiao and others, it is also a kind of protection. Otherwise, if the transfer is carried out directly with the intensity of consciousness of ordinary people, I am afraid that it will dissipate as soon as it leaves the body of heaven and earth spiritual energy. Even if the transfer is successful, most of the consciousness will be dissipated. Well, when the soul-hooking rope is transferred, it will also turn into the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and dissipate. However, it will form a spiritual force field, which can be said to be an extension of the power of the underworld, and the underworld, used to protect the soul consciousness that is seduced by it. As for the red-clothed ghost, it cannot be restrained by this kind of spiritual force field. Therefore, when he finally left the real world, Yuan Meng's consciousness came directly, suppressed the consciousness of the red-clothed ghost, and transferred him back to the prehistoric world. Looking at the red-clothed fierce ghost, Yuan Meng couldn't help but smile. He could clearly feel that after the red-clothed ghost entered the prehistoric world, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth had begun to erode his consciousness, and then gradually transformed him into a member of the prehistoric world. Yuan Meng was naturally more than happy. Because as the red-clothed ghost was gradually eroded, some of its imprints of rules began to be analyzed by the prehistoric world, and his realm, which had long been stagnant, began to slowly increase again. Of course, the soul consciousness of Zhang Wuxiao and others who entered the prehistoric world with them were also infiltrated by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. However, Zhang Wuxiao and the others were just ordinary people. They relied on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to form soul bodies and survived. Therefore, although their souls have complete sanity, they are truly pure souls. They do not contain any rules of heaven and earth, they are just a pure energy consciousness. As for the fierce ghost in red, although his consciousness is confused and he does not have complete sanity, it is manifested by combining the rules of the small world. Although when consciousness is transferred, it is impossible to transfer the rules of heaven and earth together. But there are always imprints of the rules of heaven and earth on his consciousness, and these are enough for today's Yuan Meng and the prehistoric world. As the consciousness of the red-clothed ghost was completely eroded by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, its consciousness was sorted out by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and became no longer chaotic. At the same time, the imprint of the rules of heaven and earth carried in its consciousness was also completely analyzed by the prehistoric world. Feeling the indelible aura in the core of his consciousness, Yuan Meng frowned slightly, and then transferred it again to the depths of time and space in the underworld, placing it next to the aura of the previous ghost. At the same time, suppress and seal it firmly. As for Zhang Wuxiao and others, Yuan Meng did not find any aura in the deepest part of his consciousness. He only had a relatively condensed consciousness, which was a gathering of auras for his self-awareness and was the basis of his existence. When seeing this, Yuan Meng couldn't help but look thoughtful, wondering whether the indelible aura of the red-clothed ghost and the remaining ghosts were similar existences. If this is the case at this time, Yuan Meng also has something he can't understand. That is, Zhang Wuxiao and others with clear consciousness can only gather a relatively condensed consciousness. And why did the confused red ghost and the ghost form that indelible aura? But then, Yuan Meng shook his head, gave up, and continued to think about this problem. As time goes by and the chaotic world continues to grow stronger, Yuan Meng's analysis of that bit of immortal aura continues to deepen. Yuan Meng believed that one day he would be able to completely analyze the essence of that immortal aura. And now, Yuan Meng looked at the prehistoric world with a leisurely look. As he eroded the consciousness of the red-clothed evil spirit, he thoroughly analyzed the remaining imprint of the rules of heaven and earth on his consciousness, as well as the analysis of this new small world. Yuan Meng finally made up for the last bit of the missing rules. The prehistoric world is finally about to usher in another upgrade and transformation. As Yuan Meng's thoughts fell, the entire prehistoric world trembled slightly, and a silent humming instantly resounded throughout the prehistoric world. Angroar. In the depths of the East China Sea, Zilong slightly opened his tightly closed dragon eyes, raised his head and uttered a high and deep dragon roar, then closed his eyes and lowered his head again, and fell into a deep sleep again. The prehistoric world was upgraded and transformed, and he entered the deepest level of sleep, became one with heaven and earth, and naturally grew with heaven and earth. In the current prehistoric world, there is no method of cultivation. As the innate god of the prehistoric world, he will naturally enter a state of unity between man and nature while sleeping, which is an effect that exceeds that of any skill. In the netherworld of the prehistoric underworld, the ghost also raised his head slightly in confusion. Then he took a step forward and no longer moved forward at a normal speed. Instead, he took the souls of Zhang Wuxiao and others, crossed the Yellow Spring Road, crossed the Nahi Bridge, threw them into the city of wrongful death, and then ignored them and turned away. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 95. Because of the small world itself, and the embarrassing position of being in the materialistic world of Blue Star. As a result, the small world itself not only fully accepts the spiritual energy of heaven and earth belonging to the idealistic power, but even to a certain extent, releases some of the authority of the small world, allowing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to act arbitrarily. This is also why, after suppressing the pseudo-heaven and earth will of the small world, Yuan Meng can so easily take over the small world, control the various forces in the small world, and analyze the scattered rules in it. It is nothing more than Yuan Meng's power, which belongs to the idealistic side. In this materialistic real world, the semi-idealistic small world that is rejected by it, when facing Yuan Meng's idealistic power, naturally can't wait to match it. As for the energy absorbed by the prehistoric world, what does it have to do with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? Well, that's it, there is no relationship between the two. Of course, speaking of it, the most important thing is that the small world itself does not have independent consciousness, and the pseudo-heaven and earth consciousness born from it is also completely suppressed by Yuan Meng. Therefore, as long as Yuan Meng's actions do not endanger the foundation of the small world, and only absorb a little energy from the world, the small world will not have any extreme reaction. This is why, after the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is upgraded, the small world itself will also expand. Because after the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is combined with the small world, the upgrade of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth means that the idealistic side of the small world has been strengthened. This also means that the small world has become stronger, and its area will naturally expand. It's just that the strength of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and the degree of integration with the small world in the real world are different. In addition, the different structures of the small world will also make the expansion size of the small world different. The strength of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth naturally needs no further explanation. The stronger it is, the stronger the change to the small world will naturally be. As for others, such as the small world of Donghai, because it is an open small world, facing the entire Blue Star world. After the small world grows stronger, when it expands outward, it naturally needs to face the oppression of the rules of the Blue Star world. The area it can expand is naturally average. It is already very good to expand the radius of the small world by about 1 meter. After all, the small world is strong because of the strong spiritual energy of the world, so how strong can it really be? After all, the source of the spiritual energy of the world, the prehistoric world, is just a semi-illusory world. If it had not supplemented part of the idealistic rules of the small world, it might not have reached this level. The Buzhu Mountain small world is another case. Although the Buzhu Mountain small world exists in the blue star world, it is not completely adjacent to the real dimension of the blue star. It is a semi-independent small world attached to the blue star. Therefore, when the power of its idealistic side grows and causes the area to expand, it will also be suppressed by the rules of the blue star world. However, it can still grow more, making its expansion area far exceed the East China Sea small world, and its expansion radius even reaches dozens of meters, which is dozens of times more than the East China Sea small world. Of course, this is also the size of the expansion inside the Buzhu Mountain small world, and the area bordering the blue star has also expanded by only about 1 meter, and the two sides have merged a little deeper. As for the small world of Yujukan's school, it is between the two, and the space rules in it are already extremely loose and active. However, it did not form a semi-independent space in the end, but formed a layer of different space under the instinctive manipulation of its pseudo-world consciousness and the red ghost. Although it looks extremely powerful and can divide people into different spaces. However, it has not formed a truly complete space, otherwise, how could Yujukan and others break through the layers of different spaces so easily? Just like the Buzhu Mountain small world, although everyone has left that space with pure thoughts. But in fact, everyone just left that space, and even Yuan Meng himself did not have the ability to break that space. And with the transformation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the small world of Yujukan's school also gained growth. Its activity level, which had already reached a limit of the spatial rules, finally became stronger with the addition of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and the help brought by its transformation. Without the manipulation of the red-clothed evil spirit, it autonomously derived a layer of different dimensional space. Although this newly formed different dimensional space is not strong, it is not much stronger than the different dimensional space formed by the red-clothed evil spirit. However, this is an essential transformation. With its continuous growth, it will naturally grow into a semi-independent space similar to the small world of Buzhu Mountain. Moreover, because it is a spontaneous derivative of the small world, even if it is broken thousands of times by people, as long as the small world itself is not fundamentally damaged, it can be derived infinitely. However, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, after all, did not appear in that small world for a long time, and the degree of fusion between the two is not as good as that of Buzhu Mountain and the small world of the East China Sea. Therefore, its growth is actually extremely limited. Even if it forms a different dimension, its overall size has only increased by about half a meter, which can only be regarded as barely crossing that threshold. Compared with the original, it is not much different. However, perhaps it was because of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth that helped Xiaoshandi make the final leap, and independently derived and formed an alien space. As a result, that small world's acceptance of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has greatly improved in an instant, and it has completely integrated into the shallow rules of the small world. When Yuan Meng's mind descended, he could clearly feel that there was a steady stream of energy from the small world, which spontaneously merged with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and was easily decomposed and fused by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and transformed into a new spiritual energy of heaven and earth. In just a few moments when Yuan Meng's mind descended, the concentration of heaven and earth spiritual energy in that small world had more than doubled, and even wisps of spiritual energy smoke that were visible to the naked eye began to form. If this trend continues, I'm afraid it won't take long before that small world will become a blessed land and a cave. Spiritual energy becomes clouds, divine brilliance becomes natural. And not only that, there is another thing that surprises Yuan Meng even more, that is, the red-clothed fierce ghost, whose root consciousness rests on the shallow rules of Little World, has begun to be faintly rejected by Little World, and is showing signs of being gradually stripped away. This means that these pseudo-world consciousnesses formed by the rules of the small world and the distracting thoughts of human beings can be completely eradicated. This allows Yuan Meng to take back a lot of the energy he spent suppressing them and focus more on analyzing the rules of the small world. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 96. The changes in the pseudo-world consciousness and the red-clothed devil's root consciousness surprised Yuan Meng, but he was also extremely emotional. This small world is really cold and ruthless, and interests come first. When the red-clothed fierce ghost is useful, it instantly merges the distracting thoughts of people's minds and combines them with shallow rules to derive them. And when the spiritual energy of heaven and earth became more powerful and more suitable for it, the red-clothed ghost faintly hindered it. Xiaoshandi then began to gradually peel off the root consciousness of this red-clothed fierce ghost from the superficial rules. Yuan Meng has reason to believe that when other forces that are more suitable for little heaven and earth appear, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth will also be abandoned without hesitation. However, at this time, Yuan Meng had no time to pay attention to the changes in these three small worlds. He had more important things to do now, which was related to his next plan. When he came to the edge of the small world in the East China Sea, Yuan Meng stretched out his palm, condensed a ball of heaven and earth spiritual energy, and slowly sent it out of the small world. Buzz. Yuan Meng felt a majestic pressure coming from the whole world towards his palm. Immediately, he felt his palm tremble slightly and sink instantly. Moreover, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on the palm began to boil violently, and a faint spiritual light began to bloom, resisting the pressure from heaven and earth. However, how can it be so easy to offset the pressure from the blue star world and the rules that are different from the blue star? Visible to the naked eye, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on Yuan Meng's palm began to be annihilated rapidly from the periphery. A mysterious spiritual light bloomed slightly like a candle, and spread quickly, turning into a ball of light the size of a volleyball. Even when the sun is rising, it is still shining brightly and is extremely obvious. This is the aura of heaven and earth that blooms when it resists the oppression of blue stars heaven and earth and its annihilation. More than half an hour had passed before the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in Yuan Meng's hand was completely annihilated by blue star's rules of heaven and earth, and the mysterious spiritual light blooming gradually dissipated. Although, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth still cannot exist in the blue star world, which makes Yuan Meng a little disappointed. But, Yuan Meng is also mentally prepared for this. To be honest, he was very satisfied that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth could persist on the real blue star for more than half an hour. After all, compared to the real blue star world, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth is insignificantly different. If it were not for Yuan Meng himself, he would also be a member of the blue star world and bear the brand of blue star. The aura of heaven and earth derived from his spiritual power would also belong to blue star to a certain extent. With the current strength of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, I am afraid that it will not be able to survive for even an instant in the blue star world. Didn't you see that those small worlds, whether in terms of the rules of heaven and earth or in other aspects, are far superior to the prehistoric world, but they can only be trapped in a small place and cannot spread at all. The current spiritual energy of heaven and earth can exist in the blue star world for half an hour, which is already a great improvement. Perhaps, as long as the spiritual energy of heaven and earth undergoes another transformation, it will be able to exist in the blue star world for a long time. By then, Yuan Meng can take the next step. As for now, Yuan Meng still wants to slowly analyze the rules in the small world of reality to complete the rules of the prehistoric world and make it transform again. And this time, understanding the rules may be achieved faster. Thinking of the small world of Yu Zhizhen's school, Yuan Meng couldn't help but his eyes lit up. You must know that when Yuan Meng analyzed the rules of the world before, he analyzed some scattered rules in the small world, and then reorganized them hundreds of millions of times in the prehistoric world before forming some more systematic scattered rules. And because of the transformation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which led to the advancement of the small world in Yu Zhizhen's school, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to integrate into the shallow rules of that small world. At first, he was like the fierce ghost in red, and slowly became the pseudo-world consciousness of that small world. And because of the special aura of the world, it is fully integrated with the shallow rules of the small world, which is much more than the red-clothed ghost. The red-clothed ghost can always rely on his own consciousness to mobilize part of the power of the small world, or use certain rules. They are not so much the consciousness of the world as they are puppets derived from the distractions of human beings because of the needs of the world. They are combined with some shallow rules of the small world, so that they can call on some of the rules of the small world and strengthen the idealistic power of the small world. However, after the aura of heaven and earth is merged with the rules of Xiaoshandi, it can use all the shallow rules of Xiaoshandi, and can mobilize all powers except the fundamental power of Xiaoshandi. The most important thing is that it allows Yuan Meng to understand the shallow rules of the small world more intuitively and analyze the composition of the rules. This will help him complete the prehistoric rules and save a lot of time. And when Yuan Meng finished the experiment and returned to the villa, thousands of miles away in Yuchun, Yu Zhuzhen was telling everyone in the Supernatural Bureau about the meditation method he learned from Yuan Meng. This doesn't seem to be much different from the general meditation method, right? After listening to Yuan Meng's story, someone couldn't help but ask. When supernatural areas continue to appear, how could the country not collect Buddhist and Taoist contemplation and meditation methods? It just turns out that it doesn't have much effect. On the contrary, during some meditations, they are more susceptible to the erosion of those strange and evil ghost powers. After all, isn't the general meditation method all about emptying the mind? And those who rely on their own firm will to seal the strange and evil ghost powers into their bodies, when they empty their minds, isn't that equivalent to releasing the suppression of the strange and evil ghost powers? And now, after listening to Yu Zhuken's meditation method, everyone was puzzled and disappointed. Some people even couldn't help but guess whether Yu Zhuken was unwilling to teach everyone the skills, so he just found a meditation method to fool them. Although Yu Zhuken is not a worldly wise person who can see through people's thoughts at a glance. But he also has some guesses in his heart about the doubts and even suspicions of the people. After all, he had thought about it before. Therefore, after seeing the expressions of the people and someone asking, he repeated what he heard from Yuan Meng to the people, and added another sentence at the end. What we are practicing now is evolved from this meditation method, which is the most suitable method for us. If you don't want to practice meditation, I can also teach you the method I practice. However, it is a method suitable for us after all. As for whether you can practice it and what effect you can achieve, I dare not guarantee it. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 97. This. After listening to Yu Zhuken's words, all the people in the Supernatural Bureau looked at each other, not knowing what to choose. That classmate Yu Zhuken, can we all try it? Just when everyone was considering the pros and cons, a heroic girl at the back said weakly at this time. Well, after all, she was asking for other people's skills, and after others taught her, she still wanted to ask for more. Even if she was usually capable and decisive, she didn't need to be weak at this time, and her pretty face flushed slightly. However, even so, when Yu Zhuken and everyone's eyes were all looking at her, she didn't show any shyness or fear. It's just that from the slightly white joints of her hands, it can be seen that her mood at this time is not as calm as she appears. Of course you can. Didn't I already tell you that if you don't want to practice meditation, you can practice my method? I will tell you both methods of practice. As for what you want to practice, that's your freedom. If you want to practice all of them, there's nothing wrong with that. Yu Zhuken didn't think too much about the girl's question, and nodded in approval. After Yu Zhuken agreed, the rest of the people in the Supernatural Bureau breathed a sigh of relief while being happy. They were very nervous just now, fearing that the girl's greed would anger Yu Zhuken, making things more complicated and troublesome. Even if Yu Zhuken refused now, they still had ways to obtain their method inheritance. However, relying on conspiracy or forcibly seizing the power, it would definitely make enemies with Yu Jukun and the people behind him. The country is doing the right thing, and it is naturally not afraid of anyone or any force. However, for individuals and forces, there is no need to use power to suppress others and do things that are cunning and plundering. When the general trend comes, how many people can go against the trend? Most of them are just dragged forward. The country only needs to interfere slightly to achieve its goal. However, things have not reached that level. Since Yu Jukun asked them to choose which method of practice, he naturally does not mind the leakage of his own skills. As he said before, what they practiced was the most suitable method for them. Others practiced, not to say that it is impossible to practice successfully, but they will never surpass them. As for the basic meditation method, it doesn't matter. Yuan Meng has already said that it is not a precious thing. It is just an ordinary meditation method. It is the kind that can be searched on the internet. Yu Jukun naturally has no psychological pressure. Then, Yu Jukun explained his Zilongju to everyone again. Even Zhao Li and others explained their own methods to everyone. After listening to it, everyone in the Supernatural Bureau frowned. No matter what kind of exercises Yu Jukun and the others explained, there is a most basic but most important step that cannot be avoided, that is, meditation before practicing. No matter what kind of exercises, you need to meditate first, and then visualize accordingly. For example, when practicing Yu Jukun's Zilongju, you need to empty your mind, gather the most original spiritual light, form the body of Zilong, and constantly fill it, plump up the appearance of Zilong, and finally evolve it into your own Zilong Dharma. Others, Zhao Li and others are the same, they all need to empty their minds at the beginning and condense their own power. However, this most basic and initial step is something that everyone in the Supernatural Bureau cannot do no matter what. Because as long as they dare to empty their minds, the weird and evil ghost power in their bodies will easily erode their bodies and minds, turning them into monsters with chaotic and evil thoughts. Are there no other methods that can be practiced without emptying the mind and meditating, such as those that train the body and exercise the body? Someone couldn't help asking. No, we originally comprehended our own practice methods based on meditation, so how could we possibly deviate from the scope of meditation? Yu Jukun shook his head without hesitation. In an instant, everyone's eyes dimmed. It seems that the country needs to reselect candidates and try to practice these methods. And those members of the Supernatural Bureau who suppressed the weird and evil ghost power with a firm will and incorporated it into their bodies are not destined to practice these methods. However, nothing is absolute in the world. As long as other practitioners grow up and help them eliminate the weird and evil ghost power in their bodies, they may not be unable to practice again. After making some more explanations, such as not spreading the supernatural events for the time being, everyone in the Supernatural Bureau hurriedly said goodbye and left, obviously to report this incident and the practice methods recorded by everyone. In the following days, everything returned to its former tranquility, with students going to and from school as usual, as if no supernatural events had ever occurred, nor were there any red-clothed ghosts or ghost messengers. When Tang Yuping recovered from her injuries and everyone went to the hospital to pick her up, a man in the uniform of the Supernatural Bureau stopped them. It turned out to be Zhou Peng, who had fought with them before. At this time, Zhou Peng was walking in a hurry, his eyebrows were furrowed, and he looked worried. "Captain Zhou? What's wrong with you?" Yu Zhuzhen looked at Zhou Peng in front of him in surprise. Well, not long after the last incident ended, Zhou Peng succeeded in a supernatural incident and was promoted to the captain of a supernatural team. Alas! It's not your professor's technique that's causing the trouble. Zhou Peng sighed slightly, frowned and said to Yu Zhuzhen and others. Kung Fu? How? Is there something wrong? Or do you suspect that we are hiding something? Seeing Zhou Peng's appearance, Yu Zhuzhen and the others also frowned and looked unhappy. No, no, no. We don't doubt you, but there are indeed things we need to ask you about. What happened? After we went back, we found people to try to practice the techniques you taught us. It's just. No matter how many people we look for, including ascetics from both Buddhist and Taoist sects, no matter how hard they try, there is still no sign of entry. At most, they can enter the meditative state described by the meditation method. As for the other things, such as the elemental power, the aura of heaven and earth, etc., I didn't sense them at all. Zopeng gave a wry smile and told Yu Zhuzhen and others exactly what happened. And this was also the purpose of his search for Yu Zhuzhen and others, to see if there was any clue that they had not thought of or figured out. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 98. Hey. As you might imagine, Uncle Yuan read the description of Little World in the novel and felt that the areas where extraordinary power could be used were very similar to the description of Little World in those novels, so he called those places Small World. Yu Zhuzhen smiled and nodded, confirming Zopeng's idea. Ah! This and this. This is really unexpected. Seeing that Yu Zhuzhen and the others confirmed their ideas, Zopeng felt dumbfounded for a moment. He really didn't know what to say. You said, Xiaoshandi, does our practice of Kung Fu have something to do with Xiaoshandi? Although he was shocked by the origin of Xiaoshandi's statement, Zopeng did not intend to delve deeper, but asked seriously. Well, the villa where Uncle Yuan is located is just a small world, and after we left there, the energy in our bodies basically fell into a state of silence. Unless we operate deliberately, we will basically not be able to feel it. And our practice has become extremely slow, and the movement of vitality in the body has also become difficult and obscure. But when we arrived on the third floor of the laboratory building, the vitality in our bodies instantly became extremely active. I think. Could it be that the practice of Kung Fu needs to be carried out in a small world? And Yan Ran also looked serious and solemnly expressed her guess. Yes. It's true. Maybe this is the reason. And Yan Ran's words made Yu Zhuzhen and others' eyes light up, and they felt like they suddenly realized something. So, Captain Zhou, have any of the practitioners you selected practiced in the small world? In an instant, the eyes of Yu Zhuzhen and others were focused on Zopeng. This seems to have never happened before. After all, whether they are those selected from the military or ascetic monks from the Buddhist and Taoist sects, in essence, they are just ordinary people. Naturally, we will not let them go to those dangerous places where supernatural events occur before they have accomplished anything, well, that is, in those small worlds, if anything goes wrong. Zopeng hesitated for a moment, then said with a wry smile. That's right, but I'm afraid the key to practicing Kung Fu is those small worlds. Well, now that I've found the key, I'll go back and resume my life now. If I have time, I'll treat you to a drink or a meal. Zopeng's eyes flashed slightly, and he was ready to go back and resume his life. Okay, then we'll just wait for Captain Zhou's treat, haha. Yu Zhuzhen was not polite at all and simply agreed. Okay. I'll treat you next time. Zopeng smiled bitterly and shook his head, but he had no intention of denying the credit. These members of the Supernatural Bureau, who dance on the tip of a knife and are in danger of death at any time, are paid quite a lot, and every mission will be rewarded with a large sum of money. Treating a few brats to dinner is naturally not a big deal. Question. Alas. Captain Zhou, if Xiaoshandi is dangerous, haven't the red-clothed ghosts in Xiaoshandi in the experimental building been captured by ghosts? There shouldn't be any danger there, right? Seeing Zopeng's back gradually walking away, and Yan Ran seemed to have remembered something, Her eyes flashed slightly, and she immediately reminded her softly. Haha, I got it, thank you classmate and for the reminder. Zhou Peng laughed, turned around and waved to everyone, indicating that he already knew, and then disappeared around the corner. If the country really wants to be attentive, it will move very quickly. When Yu Zhichen and others went to school the next day, many strangers had already appeared in their school. There are even monks and Taoist priests among them. Although the monks and Taoist priests were all wearing ordinary clothes, they all had bald heads with shiny foreheads, long hair that was either black, gray, or snow white, and they had an unearthly aura. A discerning person will know at a glance that these are probably outsiders from the Buddha, Taoism, and the like. Then, these people entered the experimental building. The appearance of these people naturally aroused discussion among the students again, and they all speculated whether these were Taoist priests and monks invited by the school to catch ghosts, exorcise evil spirits, and liberate resentful souls in the laboratory building. However, this is just a talking point among students after dinner, and not many people really take it to heart. And when these people entered the small world in the experimental building, they were all shocked. The scene in front of me was no longer an ordinary laboratory building. Wisps of spiritual energy clouds were floating throughout the third floor of the laboratory. The entire third floor of the experiment was set off like a dream, as if it were in a legendary fantasy wonderland. This is the legendary cave heaven and paradise, right? I really didn't expect that I would be able to see the legendary cave heaven and paradise in my lifetime. A Taoist priest with a snow-white beard and white hair looked at the fantastic scene in front of him. His beard trembled with excitement, and a glint of light flashed in his eyes. With trembling hands, he stretched out towards the spiritual energy cloud floating in front of his eyes, as if he wanted to grab it. It's just obvious that the spiritual energy cloud is not easily accessible. It is like running water and fine sand, gently passing through his fingers, bringing a refreshing feeling to it. However, the old Taoist priest didn't care about these things. He just walked forward with a slight tremor, looking at the floating spiritual clouds, which were like naughty elves, shuttling between the doors and windows of the classroom. Others were not much better, and were also shocked by the scene in front of them. They had never thought that the area where the supernatural happened, which made the country so secretive and extremely fearful, would actually be such a sacred place of immortals and gods. This was the area where the supernatural incidents happened. It would be such a place. They couldn't wait to enter it. Why would they delay for so long to enter such a fairyland? In fact, it was not only them who were extremely shocked, but Zhou Peng and others who had been here before were even more shocked. After all, when they first came here, they knew what kind of scene it was here, gloomy, empty, and terrifying. Anyone with a weaker mind would instinctively feel extremely horrified when entering here, and their bodies would tremble constantly. However, now, this place has undergone a 180-degree transformation, from the ghost realm to the blessed land of the immortals, which is really incredible. Is this the change that occurred after the strange and ghostly creatures in these small worlds were captured by the ghost messenger? Looking at the scene in front of him, Zhou Peng couldn't help but take a breath, his tone full of disbelief. When they entered the small world in the experimental building, Yuan Meng, who was far away in Qingping Mountain, immediately felt something in his heart, slightly opened his eyes, and looked in the direction of Yu Zhiken's school. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 99. If you just imagine some extremely powerful techniques, then it doesn't really make any sense. After all, the rules of illusion are illusions. In the idealistic and illusory world, these techniques should be feasible. After practicing successfully, any technique will have the power to reach the sky and earth, pick the stars and the moon, and create the world. However, in the real world, it is just some specious fantasies, which are pure nonsense. But if you add the real rules of the small world, it will be another situation. Some illusory and wrong techniques can be corrected to a certain extent under the real rules. Of course, limited by the realm of the crowd and the degree of knowledge accumulation, the low-level techniques are still okay and can reach a very perfect level. However, for the higher-level techniques, they are beyond the reach of the crowd, and most of them are still in the category of fantasy. However, this is completely enough for the people who have just started. What they lack now is not so many exquisite and profound methods. What they lack now is the basic cultivation methods that lead them to the entry level. As for the higher level skills, they can naturally be supplemented in the years to come. As time passed, a group of people began to slowly wake up. And the people who woke up, while excited, also had waves of mental fatigue. Various information and cognitions intertwined, and finally formed an effective operation law, which naturally could not be produced out of thin air. It requires a certain amount of power to promote the deduction. And Yuan Meng will naturally not bear this consumption on behalf of everyone. Therefore, after consuming a lot of energy, the people who woke up will naturally feel mentally exhausted. After all, they are all adults, not to mention some soldiers, as well as some Taoist and Buddhist ascetics, who can be regarded as people with firm wills, and naturally do not lack the self-control they should have. Therefore, the people present did not try to practice like Yu Jukan and others when they were mentally exhausted. Instead, they all began to meditate at the most basic level and slowly recovered their spirits. Yuan Meng was not very interested in the next actions of the people. It was nothing more than practicing the skills they had obtained after recovering their energy. In the small world with abundant spiritual energy, there are the most suitable exercises for each of them. Yuan Meng is not worried about their failure in practice. At this time, Yuan Meng's eyes are already looking at the prehistoric world. The Buzhu Mountain, which is already majestic and suppresses the heavens, has become more powerful again and has also transformed into reality. On the top of the Buzhu Mountain, there are 3 clear airs circling. At the waist of the Buzhu Mountain, 2 groups of good fortune condensed. At the bottom of the Buzhu Mountain, 12 groups of black and red evil spirits gathered, and waves of evil spirits rushed into the sky, which was terrifying. In the extreme west of the world, there are also 3 groups of golden light looming. In addition, in the endless starry sky above the world, the sun's essence in the sun star gathered and turned into 2 giant eggs. In the Taiyan star, the Taiyan moonlight condensed. In addition to these obvious changes in the prehistoric world, the entire prehistoric world is also heavier and more solid, and has transformed into reality. Especially the previously formed virtual heaven and Hades, which have grown greatly at this time. Let's not talk about Hades, which has only grown a little bit. For the Hades, which has already been formed, unless many yin gods are born in it, it will not have much meaning. The virtual heaven is different. It originally only formed a general framework of illusion. But at this moment, the virtual heaven has been completely solidified, with jade buildings everywhere, standing on the endless auspicious clouds, and the holy land of immortal mountains everywhere, which is a blessed place for immortals and the residence of immortals. It seems that Ah Cheng and others have taught the skills in great detail. Before these people entered the small world, they should have read a lot of novels such as Prehistoric and Immortal Cultivation. Feeling the changes in the prehistoric world, Yuan Meng murmured in a low voice. Now the dimension of the prehistoric world is still too different from the reality. No matter how ordinary people are in the real world, they are all innate sacred existences after their spirits enter the prehistoric world. Their every move, every thought, will have a great impact on the prehistoric world. For example, because of Yu Jukan and others, the ancestor dragon was born, and the netherworld and the illusory heaven were derived from it. Including everyone this time, their minds reflected the prehistoric world through the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and not only did they obtain their own cultivation methods. The prehistoric world also underwent many changes because of their thoughts and ideas. This time, not only are there many people, but the source composition is also very complex. The main ones are soldiers, monks, and Taoists. In addition, there are people from other walks of life. After all, the country's cultivation attempts, especially at this critical juncture, will definitely consider all aspects and conduct comprehensive attempts when selecting to see the impact on the cultivation of the method. In addition to the source of everyone's skills. Well, that is, Yujukan and others, when explaining the cultivation method, they will definitely bring their own understanding. And to be honest, where do their understandings come from? In addition to the book knowledge they have learned now, I am afraid that more of them come from various martial arts, fairy tales, and fantasy novels. When explaining, they can't fail to mention the content of the novels, and may even mention the source of these contents bluntly. Especially after hearing the source of the term small world, it is even more impossible for the country not to consider the impact of these novels. If it were in the past, when talking about the content of these novels, I'm afraid any normal adult would be dismissive of it, let alone the senior leaders. But now that supernatural events have broken out, even if it is a small possibility, the senior leaders will not let it go. Therefore, I'm afraid that most people who enter this small world have read many novels such as Immortal Cultivation and Fantasy. It is precisely because of this that when everyone's mind is reflected in the wild, many of their thoughts and ideas are captured by the wild world, and many strange existences are born. Of course, in addition to this, when the cognition of the people derives the skills, the illusory rules that are finally produced are also a supplement to the wild world. After all, in fact, these illusory rules that are finally produced are not completely illusory. After all, it comes from everyone's understanding of the real world, and it also has the real rules of the small world as a framework. Even if there are still some differences, there must be many real rule fragments, and they are all similar rule fragments. And these real rule fragments are enough to guide Yuan Meng in the general direction and save him a lot of time. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 100. Time flies, and more than half a year has passed in the blink of an eye. In the past 6 months, earth-shaking changes have taken place on the land of Shenzhou. The number of practitioners has gradually increased and risen, and there is no need to suppress and control the power of weird and evil spirits with personal will or even human life to fight against weird and evil spirits. Correspondingly, more and more different small worlds are filled with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, becoming small worlds that can be controlled by Yuan Meng. Similarly, this world will definitely not lack smart people, let alone those who can become a high-level person or a person with extremely high achievements in a certain field. Those who treat others as fools are the real fools themselves. Gradually, they have all kinds of speculations about the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, about each small world, and even about the prehistoric world, including the exercises they practice. For example, not all small worlds have the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It is even possible that all small worlds do not contain the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. And these spiritual energies of heaven and earth should all come from the prehistoric world, and cannot enter the real world, and can only exist in small worlds. Even in the small world, it is necessary to carry out corresponding guidance before the spiritual energy of the prehistoric world can be attracted to descend. As for the reason for this situation, although everyone does not have a clear conclusion, there are many guesses. This is either because the prehistoric world is too weak, so the spiritual energy of the prehistoric world cannot completely enter the blue star world, and can only exist in the small world. It also needs people or things in the prehistoric world to guide, such as people who practice the prehistoric world's skills, or the corresponding spiritual energy of the world, to enter these small worlds. Another situation is that the prehistoric world may be very strong, even stronger than the blue star world. However, the prehistoric world is strong, but it is not so easy to invade the blue star world. It can only be eroded slowly bit by bit. Finally, If the prehistoric world is really as powerful as described in some novels, if it wants to invade the Blue Star world, it probably doesn't take much time and energy to control the Blue Star world. Unless, these heavenly and earthly auras are just the unintentional leakage of the prehistoric world, and inadvertently flow into the Blue Star world, into some small worlds formed for unknown reasons. If the prehistoric world is compared to the sea, the heavenly and earthly auras are the sea water in the sea. And the Blue Star world is the island in the sea, and the pits and low-lying areas in the islands are the small worlds. Between the ebb and flow of the tide, there will always be sea water flowing into the island. If there are potholes near the sea, then the sea water will definitely flow into it. And the potholes inside the island will not allow sea water to flow in, so it is necessary to dig ditches to guide the sea water to flow inward. And the humans who practice the prehistoric world's skills, or the heavenly and earthly auras from the prehistoric world, play the role of digging ditches and guiding the heavenly and earthly auras into the small world. But no matter what, although the sea is vast and an island is nothing, under normal circumstances, the sea will not pose any threat to the island. However, if the sea notices the island and sets off huge waves, it can also submerge it in an instant. This is the imagined relationship between the prehistoric world and the Blue Star world. The details are certainly not that simple, but the general meaning is this. As for the fact that the Blue Star is stronger than the prehistoric world, it is not that everyone has not thought about it, but later, they gave up this idea. After all, they have all entered the prehistoric world with their minds and have seen the vast and endless sea of stars. Probably few people think that the Blue Star is stronger than the prehistoric world. And the skills that everyone has obtained should be the understanding of the world, the various knowledge they have learned, and the cognition of the universe and self, which are generated after the induction and intersection with the heavenly way of the prehistoric world, or the will of heaven and earth. Because it is the induction and intersection with the prehistoric world where cultivation is prevalent, what is finally formed is a variety of cultivation methods. If the world that resonates with everyone is a world where technology is supreme, what they obtain may be all kinds of scientific and technological knowledge. Well, if there is also such a thing as heavenly way and will of heaven and earth in the technological world. However, no matter what the reason is, the current Shenzhou, and even the humans in the Blue Star world, do not have many choices. Compared with those weird and evil spirits born in the small world, which are confused, bloodthirsty and violent, these relatively mild and controllable spiritual energy from the prehistoric world is much better. Naturally, from the moment the spiritual energy of heaven and earth appeared in the eyes of the Shenzhou high-level officials, the choice was already very obvious. And this is why the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was introduced into the small world, and the reason why cultivation was spread so quickly. Because behind all these things, there are all the Shenzhou high-level officials pushing. It's almost done at last. In the villa under Qingping Mountain, Yuan Meng exhaled a long breath and slowly opened his eyes. In the past 6 months, Yuan Meng's pressure has not been small. Small worlds have been discovered one after another, and practitioners have been guiding the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to descend in those small worlds. And each of these operations required Yuan Meng to personally control and preside over the fusion of the two sides. In fact, if it was just about operating the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, whether it was the heavenly venerable, the human emperor, or the dark emperor, they were all the most supreme existences, second only to Yuan Meng himself. If it was in the chaos outside the prehistoric world, or even in other more distant chaotic energy groups, they could do it easily. But for the Blue Star in a higher dimension, they were a little powerless. Only Yuan Meng, because of his special identity, could do this and integrate all of the two sides. After all, Yuan Meng was not only the creator of the prehistoric world and the source of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, but he was also a member of the real Blue Star world. Only under Yuan Meng's control could the spiritual energy of heaven and earth be smoothly integrated into the small world, successfully replacing the chaotic pseudo-world consciousness in it and becoming a new world consciousness. Well, it should be more accurate to say that those world consciousnesses were sealed. After all, up to now, even for the small world in Yujukan's school, Yuan Meng has not separated the pseudo-world consciousness from the shallow rules of the small world, let alone other newly controlled small worlds. It is precisely because of this that Yuan Meng needs to do it himself for each small world, which makes him highly nervous and focused during this period of time, fearing any mistakes. After all, nowadays, neither he nor the prehistoric world has grown up. Once there is a mistake, it will cause the country to doubt the spiritual energy of the world, even the prehistoric world, and Yuan Meng himself. Then for Yuan Meng, it will be a fatal threat. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 101. It is precisely because of the emergence of Shu Xiaoshandi that no one from the country has approached Yuan Meng so far, but it is not that the top officials of the country have forgotten his existence. It is because these small worlds are almost all under the control of the state, and all the small worlds have been led to receive the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. As for the practice of Kung Fu, it has been vigorously promoted in the military or among the core leaders of China. And what Yuan Meng has? It is nothing more than a small world, and there are other villas in it, which are not exclusive to Yuan Meng. As for the cultivation techniques, after careful discussion by the state, it was felt that it should be Yuan Meng, who was lucky enough to be the first to communicate with the ancient world through meditation, and then he had extraordinary abilities. However, Yuan Meng's practice skills are only suitable for Yuan Meng, and are not worth the country's efforts to obtain them. Up to now, with the vigorous promotion and summary of the country, I don't know how many exercises have been derived. What about practicing martial arts, meditating and refining qi, contemplating and refining gods, cultivating immortals, demons and gods, fantasy side, fairy side? There are all kinds of things that Yuan Meng could not compare to by his own thinking. Moreover, the intention of each of these techniques is extremely lofty. It is really either to destroy the heaven and earth, or to create the world, or to be the supreme great Luo, or the supreme immortal emperor. Yuan Meng absolutely recognized this point. Looking at the ancient world, countless prototypes of rules were crisscrossed. It has even formed illusory and unique avenues that transcend the endless dimensions of time and space and penetrate into every corner of the prehistoric world. Then we can also know how hard these many practitioners work and how rich their imagination is. It's a pity that it's just an idea. As for the specifics, it can still exert some power in the small world. As for reality, it can still only regulate the body, but it will not make them much stronger. And it is precisely based on this that although the country still pays enough attention to Yuan Meng, the first person to start practicing cultivation, it is not indispensable. Since Yuan Meng is willing to stay in the villa and live a semi-secluded life, as long as Yuan Meng does not touch the bottom line of China, they are willing not to disturb him. The magnanimity of a huge country cannot tolerate even a single non-staff practitioner. If this is the case, it will not be far from going downhill. Well, of course, there is still necessary monitoring, such as for people who have newly moved into the villa behind. Yuan Meng also knew this, but as long as those people didn't bother him, he just didn't bother to pay attention. This can be regarded as a tacit understanding between both parties. In the outside world, after more than half a year of development, except for some deep mountains and old forests, there are small worlds in the corners. The small world above the mainland of China is basically under control, and Yuan Meng can naturally relax a little and carry out the next actions. For example, the upgrade and transformation of the prehistoric world. Each small world is controlled by Yuan Meng, and various laws and principles are analyzed by him. Yuan Meng's understanding of the rules of heaven and earth has already reached the extreme of the current state, and even goes far beyond it. If he hadn't been distracted by the small worlds one by one, almost every day, a varying number of small worlds would enter his eyes, requiring him to integrate and control them. He could have upgraded the prehistoric world a long time ago. Yuan Meng's mind merged into the prehistoric world, sweeping through the countless prototypes of rules, the innate sacred, the embryo of the devil. Well, including Zilong, all of them have become innate embryonic states at this time. This is also something that can't be helped. Thousands of people have thousands of faces, and thousands of people have different methods. Regarding the ancestral dragon, as well as those innate saints and demon gods, everyone has their own knowledge, and all kinds of information are intertwined and integrated. This caused the thinking of all the innate saints and demon gods to fall into a chaotic state of chaos. Only when they have summarized and sorted out all this information completely, formed their own system, and gained self-awareness. And after integrating all kinds of different information with them, and even the completely opposite forces, they are all integrated into one furnace, brought under control, and formed into their own power. These innate gods and demons were able to completely wake up from this chaotic state and be reborn. On the contrary, the ghosts in the underworld did not fall into this chaotic state. Instead, they gradually developed true wisdom and gained complete self-understanding. This is naturally not because Goicha is stronger than Zilong and the others, but because of Goicha's special status. For more than half a year, every time a new small world is brought under control, ghosts will enter it to capture weird and powerful ghosts, that is, the pseudo-world consciousness of those small worlds. Of course, this is only part of the reason why ghosts become stronger. Whenever a strange or powerful ghost is captured by it, there will always be pure energy absorbed by its soul-grabbing rope, which becomes the nourishment for the growth of ghosts and soul-hooking ropes. But more importantly, whenever ghosts come, those practitioners who enter these small worlds will all see it. The various mental fluctuations caused by these practitioners seeing ghosts, and their understanding of ghosts are all through the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, which are constantly converging towards ghosts. If that were the case, Gazashi's mind and heart might be the most chaotic. However, in the legend, the ghost messenger in the underworld is never a single person. Those pure thoughts and spiritual power are naturally absorbed by the ghost messenger who descends. And those different perceptions of the ghost messenger will be separated one by one after the ghost messenger enters the underworld of the underworld, under the influence of the power of the underworld, forming new ghost messengers. So far, there are nearly 1,000 ghost messengers in the entire underworld. It's a pity that the souls that need to be triggered by the ghost messenger now are only the pseudo-heaven and earth consciousness of those small worlds, so there is no need for so many ghost messengers. Therefore, most of the ghost messengers in the underworld are just shuttling back and forth between the gates of the underworld road according to instinct. As for capturing the pseudo-heaven and earth consciousness, most of them are done by the first ghost messenger who is born. Unless there are more than 2 small worlds at the same time, which are controlled by Yuan Meng's fusion of heaven and earth aura, other ghost messengers will descend. As for the first ghost messenger, because he descended into the small world again and again, he was blessed by the power of everyone's thoughts, and his current power was even no weaker than that of the innate saints like Zilong. Zilong and his people were like a sea that could accommodate all kinds of rivers. All their cognitions would be transformed into various different information and different powers, and merged with them. This made their power vast and majestic, containing everything, but also made their thinking confused and their minds chaotic. The Journey of Creation from Fantasy to Reality. Author, Get a Spark. Chapter 102. Chapter 105 Successive Transformations, the Characteristics of the Prehistoric World. The Ghost Messenger was stripped of most of the chaotic and mixed power and information, and only the most pure part of the power was retained. Although this made his power lose its majesty, It also made his power extremely pure and could be fully controlled by him. If he had the same power, the current ghost messenger could actually crush all the innate sacred beings. Moreover, the power of the ghost messenger was not weak. After all, he was in most of the small worlds. Even if most of the mixed power and information were removed, his ghost power could be considered the top among all the innate sacred beings and demon gods. Yuan Meng did not pay too much attention to the changes in the prehistoric world. He only took a glance and then retracted his gaze. Alas! What a pity! After retracting his gaze, Yuan Meng couldn't help but shake his head slightly, feeling quite sorry. If it develops normally, even if there are constantly practitioners who add their own cognition of many innate sacred gods and demon gods to these innate sacred gods and demon gods, it still doesn't take long for these innate sacred gods and demon gods, at most billions of years, to sort out the countless messy information, control all their own power, awaken self-cognition, and wake up from the chaos of thinking. Don't think that billions of years are very long. After all, that is for the prehistoric world. In fact, it is just a few days for the real world. What's more, even in the prehistoric world, what can billions of years count for? In the current prehistoric world, the least valuable thing is time. It's just that they don't have a chance. Yuan Meng sighed slightly, and then he no longer paid attention to it, but integrated his mind into the entire chaotic prehistoric world, and began to summarize and sort out many Tao principles and legal principles, and finally merged them. Boom! The entire chaotic prehistoric world shook slightly, and an invisible force swept everything in an instant. Wherever this force passed, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in all places instantly became 100 times thinner. Even the heaven and earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars of the prehistoric world became extremely sparse. Fortunately, it was only a moment, and the heaven and earth, the sun, the moon, and the stars of the prehistoric world all suddenly shrank 100 times and became solid again. No, although it shrank 100 times, it was more resilient and more powerful than before, far more than 100 times. After all, the condensation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth has never been as simple as condensing 10 times and swallowing 10 times the energy. It is more of a change of rules. Even if those spiritual energy particles are converted back into the most primitive pure energy, they are still more than 1 billion times stronger and tougher than at the beginning. Not to mention the current spiritual energy particles, which are even more tough. According to Yuan Meng's estimation, these spiritual energy particles are not far behind the 2 true spirits suppressed by them. I believe that after advancing 3 or 2 times, they will be enough to compare with the true spirit. At that time, Yuan Meng could easily analyze the true spirit and obtain all the information it contained. After the prehistoric world shrank 100 times, the chaotic power outside the world, attracted by the prehistoric world, began to rush into the prehistoric world frantically. The entire prehistoric world began to expand and grow again, and even after it expanded to its original size, it did not mean to stop at all. Instead, it swallowed the chaotic power outside the world at a faster speed and continued to expand and grow. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, the speed of the expansion of the prehistoric world finally slowed down and reached its current limit. Well, it really reached the current limit. As long as Yuan Meng integrated and sorted out many rules again, the prehistoric world could undergo another transformation. After all, the principles and laws of many different small worlds were all gathered in the prehistoric world. How could it be possible that it could only undergo one transformation? He glanced at the prehistoric world again, and saw those innate sacred and demon gods who were about to wake up but fell into a deeper slumber again because of the transformation and upgrading of the world. Yuan Meng closed his eyes expressionlessly again, his mind merged into the chaotic world, standing on the endless dimension of time and space, looking down at the infinite chaos and the 3 realms of the primitive world. Yuan Meng's mind moved again, and as various rules flowed, endless fragments of Tao and Law were quickly summarized and sorted out, integrated into the illusory rules, making them gradually become real. Boom. Everything that happened before was repeated again, the world was upgraded, the aura transformed, and everything, all shrunk 100 times again. However, after the primitive world shrank this time, it did not recover or expand again. It's not that I don't want to, but I can't. Because the power of chaos outside the primitive world has become extremely thin at this time, and it can no longer support the growth of the primitive world again. After all, the infinite chaos derived by Yuan Meng is not the real chaos, and the energy contained in it also has its limits. Under normal circumstances, in the previous few advancements of the prehistoric world, the chaotic power of the infinite chaos should have been consumed long ago, turning into a real chaotic void. The void is endless, and not even a trace of energy exists. The reason why the prehistoric world can be promoted continuously without worrying about the lack of energy is that there is a small world outside that constantly replenishes energy. Including the chaotic power outside the prehistoric world, it was transformed by the prehistoric world absorbing the energy of the small world before. Whenever the spiritual energy of the prehistoric world is sufficient and there is no advancement, a large amount of spiritual energy will be scattered into the chaos and transformed into infinite chaotic power. When the prehistoric world is promoted and transformed, it will be swallowed again and transformed into the power needed by the prehistoric world. However, this time the prehistoric world has undergone two transformations in succession, which has led to the chaos power outside the prehistoric world being almost consumed, which is completely insufficient to support the second recovery and growth of the prehistoric world. As a result, after the prehistoric world shrank 100 times for the second time, it did not expand again and remained in the state after shrinking. However, this is actually not a big difference for the vast and boundless prehistoric world. After all, in the current prehistoric world, apart from those innate gods and demons who have not yet been born, there are no other creatures. Moreover, even if it is reduced by 100 times, the current prehistoric world is not much different from the previous one. Any small mountain is also measured in light years. Well, the prehistoric world is so different. All things in the prehistoric world have one common feature. If you use one word to describe it, it is big. Very big. Mountains, rivers, lakes, including the sun, moon, and stars in the sky, all need to be measured in light years.